We're talking 60 to 90 days from the time the order's put in until the time the house is delivered on site, installed, all the site work is complete, garages and flat work, all that kind of stuff. That is simply spectacular when you compare it to site build. So if I'm a builder and I'm building a lot of houses and developments, and we're seeing a huge uptick in builders that want to do not just 5 or 10, but they want to do communities of 3, 4, 500 units at a time. The time it takes me, my carrying costs are dramatically less if I'm taking 90 days as opposed to 9, 10, or even 7, 8 months.
Welcome to the Builder Straight Talk podcast with your host, Michael Creasa. Get the unfiltered truth from the trenches of construction, real estate, and funding. This episode is made possible by our parent company, Sound Capital, funding built for builders.
Well, Brian, my friend, welcome to the call again. Last time we tried doing this, the gods were against us. No sound, lightning. I don't know. We'll write it off to the way things are, I guess.
Technology
but welcome
in
back.
2025 isn't as perfect as it needs to be, so that's okay. We're here now
Well,
again.
that's okay. We need to focus on building technology, and that's the nature of today's call, because we're going to talk about all things modular. All right. And I'll be a bit of a protagonist, because when I think of modular, I think of trailer park boys. And
Everybody does. Almost
and
everybody.
yeah, and what's the other one that I would think of? Breaking Bad, mobile meth labs.
I literally talked to somebody yesterday and I said, you know what, I hear that same analogy all the time. Everybody thinks it's a mobile home in the sticks, something out of the show Breaking Bad. I mean, but that's the perception.
Yeah, well, I didn't want to disappoint you by thinking of something original. So let's start off with that, man. So, until we get through that hurdle, because I see it multifaceted. One is public perception.
Sure.
Two is lending perception, because the people that have the money to finance these things. And three would be the actual builder perception, because they're the ones that are ultimately buying these things to construct.
Correct.
So let's tackle that one by one. And maybe between you and I, we can solve world hunger, the regulation building permits in California, and maybe climate. Let's knock those three out of the
Maybe
park,
one
and
out of
then
the three
modular.
would be good for this call. We can tackle the other two on future calls, but I love your ambition.
Okay. So take it off, my friend. Why the myth? Let's talk about the construction style first. Are
Yeah.
these things basically made of tin foil and used insulation?
No, they're not. They're made from the same materials, 2x6s and sheetrock and drywall and granite countertops and hardwood floors and all of that kind of stuff. I mean, it's essentially, very, very similar to the same materials that are done. We're talking manufactured modular, same as what's done on site. It's just built in a quality control environment, which in essence means in a lot of cases that the finished product is actually superior, because you don't have to deal with rain getting, soaking the timber or getting in, places you don't want it to get into. And then the waste is dramatically less. But, back to your original question, no, it's not made of tinfoil or plastic or anything else. Today's manufactured and modular homes are nearly the equivalent, and again, in some cases, superior to their site built counterparts.
Well, the aspect that I really am intrigued by, one, they're made on an assembly line. So when you talked about waste, I heard a statistic that you can literally take all the waste, if you will, byproducts, bits and pieces, and put them into one trash can, because they're so efficient with what they do.
Yeah.
Versus if you go to any job site, any given day of the week, you've got 2x4s with nails sticking out, half a sheeted drywall here. So if you compare the two on just cost savings alone, or if you really want to get California-ish, the trash footprint that you're making
Yeah.
is substantially less.
Yeah, you're right. I think one of my favorite things to do is to go on a factory tour, and if you've ever had any curiosity about manufactured and modular, go on a tour. Closest one you can find. It's absolutely fascinating to watch. You kind of assume that people are going to go from station to station. In fact, the houses actually get moved to the crews that are working on them. It's really kind of cool. But at the end, one of my favorite tours was Clayton at their Waco facility in Texas. Good friend Andrew Bryant took us on this tour, and he points to these 2-gallon or 280-gallon drums at the very end. He goes, "That is where we put the waste for each house." And I'm thinking, wow, kind of what you were talking about. How many job boxes does the typical site built house take? When you're going through, framing and finish out and HVAC and all of that kind of stuff. It's incredibly fascinating to see the difference. And Clayton built a community, or they provided the homes for a builder called Cook Brothers in Knoxville, Tennessee. And it's really cool to see a whole neighborhood with one dumpster for the entire street, not just for one house, but the entire street. So, and I think that's not something that most people really talk about when they talk about offsite construction is the sustainability, which, was a buzzword for the last some odd years. It's really pretty incredible how little waste there is and how efficient. And I've even seen there's a company called Cutting Edge Modular out in California, and they take even the small 2x4s and 2x6 pieces that are left over. They put them in what they call the boneyard, which I thought was kind of cool. And they save all of that, and they continue to use it over time and over time and over time. So it's kind of the unsung hero of offsite, the sheer lack of waste compared to site built.
I think something you touched on earlier is the actual, I don't want to say composition, the structure,
Mhm.
let's say structural integrity. If you compare that to a traditional build, that literally are a traditional built home. The difference is you're doing it on an assembly line.
Correct.
And the thing that really stands out to me is you mentioned controlled environment. When I think of traditional build outside, especially when you're hitting October, November, the rains are there, depending obviously where you are.
Yeah.
But that wood's getting moldy. Then you're wrapping it in insulation and vapor barrier and everything else. I got to think from a healthy home perspective that modular would be more healthy than conventional stick.
Well, absolutely, because all of the environmental factors that go as you're building a site built house. I mean, you're talking a house that can be constructed over 9 to 12 months, sometimes longer. How much of that is spent, where it's exposed to the elements and whatnot? I know I believe you had a podcast with our good friend Ken Semler. Ken is an absolute mouthpiece for how impactful weather can be on site built versus manufactured, which is built under a roof in a factory in a quality controlled environment. So yeah, there's a dramatic difference. All the allergens, all the water, all of that that can get stuck in the materials and then enclosed within the walls and whatnot. So yeah, there's a dramatic difference, just as what can get in the insulation and all that if it's not properly contained. So without a doubt, weather can have a dramatic impact, much less the building footprint. A lot of markets, I mean, we're down here in Texas in the South, but, like our friends like you up in Canada and in the northern states, what is the amount of time that you can build throughout the year? It's dramatically reduced if you're site built. Whereas, if you're manufactured, you're not going to be delivering and installing a manufactured home in the heart of winter. But, the fact that it comes nearly complete, really expands when you can build, especially in northern states.
When we're talking about the actual style of the home,
Mhm.
are they, I don't want to say identical, but very similar to conventional build? Because I still have this misconception. And again, it's my fault, but you've got a double wide that you're slapping together and you're calling that a home.
I think that's a really good question. I think it just goes to perception, and again, I firmly believe the best answer to that question is going and experience it, touching, feeling, all of that. That's what changed my perspective, Michael. I spent time at the big event in Louisville they do every year for offsite construction, and I walked the product, touched it, I walked through it, all of that, and you realize, wow, this was built in a factory, and it's astonishing. And so there are certain limitations. Currently, manufactured homes have to be built on frames. There's current legislation underway that if it's passed, those frames will be removed so you can start going vertical. Modular is very different. Modular is tremendously customizable. Again, going back to our friend Ken Semler at Impressive Modular, they build, I mean, you can do craftsman, you can do modern, you can do all different types and styles of homes, and even manufactured, you have front porches and garages and higher roof pitches and dormers and all that kind of stuff. It's not just two rectangles slapped together like they used to be. Now there is some of that. There is some very, very basic models and I think a huge part of what we talk about on a regular basis is attainable housing. Yeah, the simpler the design, the more attainable the price point's gonna be. But that's no different than the big public builders out there. Big public builders, their lowest cost homes are nothing more than a 6 to 800, which is crazy, to 1,000 square foot box. I mean, some of the public builders are literally building 800 square foot homes that are nothing more than just a basic square. So, but what is achievable is fantastic. Some of the mods that Clayton and Champion are doing are spectacular. Vaulted ceilings and lofts and all of that kind of stuff. Not what you'd expect by any means.
Well, they're actually doing small apartment buildings out of this. So you're talking like 4, 5, 6 story buildings with
You
modular, and that
can
kind of blew my mind. Yeah.
Yeah, with modular, and that's actually been around for a while. I always love to give shout outs. My friends at Diversity Resources Group, they've been doing military base housing and government housing and school. And they just got back from Maui replacing housing after the fires they had a few years ago. Absolutely. I mean, these are apartments, they're hotels, they're restaurants, all of that kind of stuff. Modular is spectacular what it can actually do. It'll blow your mind.
Let's go back to you mentioned the Cook brothers. Where is it that they basically planted their flag? They did like a mini subdivision.
Just outside of Knoxville, and that's a really cool story. What I need to do is get Michael Bryant with Clayton on this call. You would love him. He would love you. Our friends at Sound Capital actually working on quite a few projects that he's overseeing. But, so Knoxville, where Clayton is headquartered, Cook Brothers is right in their backyard. Cook Brothers, I believe they have probably 6 or 7 traditional site-built communities, and they came to Clayton and said, "Hey, look, we wanna look at an alternative to spending 6, 7, 8 months to build a house." And, Clayton provided a really, really neat model, and they built a whole community called Harvest Meadow just outside of Knoxville. Michael, you can't when you walk the streets, and it helps that it's surrounded by, old growth trees and it's beautiful there. But these are really nice homes. And the cool thing is, as I understand it, the initial houses were actually appraising for more than what they were selling for. So done very, very well and provides actually a really cool footprint of what's available out there.
So that was going to be my next question. Like I've been in real estate since '89, right? So broker, trainer, coach, all that wonderful stuff, right? And I'm still passively selling, if you will. And I'm in the rural heartland of Ontario. And I think about 2 months ago, I had a young couple, and we're looking at a place, and it looked wonderful, but there was something about it just felt a bit, I don't want to say claustrophobic, but the hallways just felt a bit too narrow. The wife giggled and said something about, well, at least it's not a trailer home. And I said, yeah, you're right. And then I walked them to their car. They took off, and I was about to go. And then there was just something in the back of my brain was saying, go back, take another look, but go underneath. And I went under the porch, and there was like a little inspection hatch, if
Mhm.
you will. And I opened it
Yeah.
up, and I want to use the F word several times, but I could see the chassis of the undercarriage. And this was obviously a trailer once upon a time, and they built a home around it. And
Yeah.
I'm thinking, like, why wouldn't you just knock that sucker down and build a real house? But no, they've encompassed a home around a trailer, which in my mind has no value whatsoever because it's not a home, it's not a trailer. You can't call it modular. I don't know what it was, but it was an atrocity. If you were to blindfold me and drop me into Harvest Meadow and put me inside one of the homes, could I tell that it's a trailer? No, sorry, trailer home, a modular home?
No, you couldn't tell that. All you would realize is that it's a home, much like anything else, even though they do have frames on them. You would not be able to tell. The only way you'd be able to tell, Michael, is if you actually saw them deliver, install, that sort of thing. But once that unit is on the ground, you have the regular trades and crews and all that kind of stuff, and it looks identical to site built, but you cannot tell. Same materials, same quality of build, same finish out. The finish outs are spectacular. No, you would not be able to tell.
I would probably argue that from, again, getting back to the integrity part of it, because I think this is where modular home gets a bad rap. When I was teasing you that they're basically made from gum wrappers and tinfoil. These things have to be built probably stronger than a conventional home because they're loaded up on a truck. And then they have to travel the highways and byways of the US, and not all those roads are like a baby's bum. Like, they shake around pretty much and then delivered to the site without any
Correct. Yeah.
cracks, without
Yeah.
any, lack of integrity, if you will. Am I off the mark by saying that?
Well, I think it's a fair concern. It's kind of fascinating. There's actually a very interesting, there's really a whole science around it, which even I couldn't get completely into. But number one, the houses are built under HUD code. There is certain requirements in terms of structural design, quality, fire safety, energy efficiency, all of that kind of stuff. There is a high resistance, or there has to be a high resistance to transportation stress, that sort of thing. How they're transported, I think it's fascinating if you ever get the opportunity to talk to a transport company. Some of the most interesting and colorful characters you'll ever meet, but they can tell you some crazy stories about, challenges they've had and crazy drivers. People don't like to get stuck behind a manufactured house. And then ultimately the frame. The fact that there is a frame on it, it does help with their structural integrity. So it would be interesting to see, how these are built and constructed and designed if that frame is removed. But yeah, I think it's a fair assessment. But ultimately, again, by the time it gets out there, and they're always done in sections. I think it should be fairly obvious, but you're not delivering the whole house on the same trailer. You have one, usually modules sections. There can be single wide, double wide, triple wide, whatnot, and then they're installed on site through marriage walls and whatnot. So I think you'll find that, yes, there's always going to be little cracks and little issues that have to be touched up and fixed once they get delivered, set, installed, all of that. But from a structural standpoint, very, very well built and designed specifically to avoid, what torquing and whatnot can do during the transportation phase.
Yeah, I would have argued that there would probably be less cracks and such because they have to focus so much on the integrity for the trans.
Correct. I mean, you're not having to deal with the same settling and all that. I mean, you're gonna have some of that, but a lot of the settling you're already pre-preparing for, unlike a site-built house, or it might happen over a year or 2 years or 3 years or whatnot, so.
What's the benefit to a builder to go with modular? Like, I'm not saying completely switch over, but maybe they add that to their portfolio of what they're doing.
Yeah, I love that question because I think, it's, Cardinal Financial, we've been answering that question a lot over the last 6 months. Champion did a, amazing event up in Cleveland, a little over a month ago, bringing in builders and developers, and, the phone's literally been ringing off the hook. As your friend Steve Ahern at Sound Capital knows, he's working on a lot of these projects with us. But what we found is that a lot of builders, yes, they maybe wanna do it because it's a bit less per square foot, but it's not always, depending on whether you're looking at manufactured or modular, and there is a difference. But even if it's not necessarily cheaper in terms of cost per square foot, Michael, I think one of the biggest needs or desires is how do we reduce the time that it takes to build? How do we increase our cycle time? Whereas you might have one turn a year, meaning the ability to build one house within a year. With site built, with manufactured modular, you might have it to four. We're talking 60 to 90 days from the time the order's put in until the time the house is delivered on site, installed, all the site work is complete, garages and flat work, all that kind of stuff. That is simply spectacular when you compare it to site build. So if I'm a builder and I'm building a lot of houses and developments, and we're seeing a huge uptick in builders that want to do not just 5 or 10, but they want to do communities of 3, 4, 500 units at a time. The time it takes me, my carrying costs are dramatically less if I'm taking 90 days as opposed to 9, 10, or even 7, 8 months. So yeah, I think the speed with which these can be done is one of the leading factors. Pricing and availability, yes, those things are important, but also the trades. And I mean, number of factors can impact trades. not the least of which might be, government policy on immigration, that sort of thing. We won't get into that. But trades are an issue. We've known that for a long time now. We've done a poor job of of supporting trade schools and whatnot. We've made it, not so glamorous to be a carpenter or an HVAC guy or a plumber or whatever. And now we're paying the price because the trade population is aging. There's not a lot of new young people getting into that space. So, I think that's an issue. Plus the fact that how do I get trades out to where land is affordable? Easier to get them when you're within a major metropolitan area, but where's all the building going? It's going out in the submarkets. You might be 10, 20, 30 miles out of town. So when you have your trades, instead of bringing them out to the site, they're in your factory. And some of these, Michael, are climate controlled, air conditioned, that sort of thing. Not all of them. A lot of them still aren't. They're getting there. That helps dramatically. And they're consistently working. They're consistently, they have work, they get paid, all of that. So I think, again, to kind of recap, I think that speed to build, speed to market is one, trade availability, and then, of course, a price point that is typically, not always, typically less than the site built counterpart. I think that's where
Yeah.
builders find those are really kind of the three main attributes.
I could see part of it when you talk about the speed to build, you would have to think that there is a cost savings in the fact that you are producing it quicker.
Well, yeah, you don't have to pay the carrying cost for 9 months. Yeah,
Yeah, and you're not paying a full team to be out there doing what they do. So
correct.
if you're shaving, 2 months off the equation, that's got to impact the builder's bottom line at the end of the day.
100%. It's well said. And regardless of whether, let's say, the materials and everything being equal for the two, you're still substantially less, which again, or which can then be passed on to the end buyer, either increasing margins, past, savings to the buyer, or a combination of both, because you're paying that much less because you're not paying for 6 months of labor and paying for, site work, all that kind of stuff. So it's pretty fascinating.
I'll do a partial detour because you opened that door when you talked about labor and the fact that we've got an aging
Mhm.
marketplace, if you will, of labor. I think the number is for every 5 that retire, only 1.5 are coming in. So we've done a true disservice to a whole generation by incentivizing them to go to university and coming up with a degree in gender dance theory that is going to leave them living in their parents' basement. They won't be able to get married. They won't be able to afford a home. And we're seeing this
Yeah.
right now. And I'm not going to go on a tirade because once I do, yeah, you got to beat me with a shovel. Because then I talk about indoctrination that kids aren't actually learning. They're not learning critical
That's a
thinking
whole nother
skills.
conversation that could take
Yeah.
about 3 or 4 hours and a lot of, passion and maybe a little,
A lot of
raised
bourbon,
voices,
yeah.
so, yeah.
So, all that being said, the point was we've done a disservice to a whole generation of kids because when you downplay not only the importance of the trades, but I'm gonna say it's a noble profession, right? And
Absolutely.
that's not meant to be a plug for Mike Rowe's bourbon, which is called Noble Bourbon, and there's another story I'll tell you about that one.
If there's anything wrong
But
with that.
yeah, I've never had bourbon. I don't know. I fall asleep with tea. But I think we've done a bad job incentivizing and getting the message out. And I'm looking at the
Right.
manufacturers of Modular to say, hey, guys, maybe there's an opportunity here for you guys to get more people into the trade by going right to not the universities, but right to the high schools and getting people. I realize that insurance liability and in the US, everything's litigious, that you can get sued for saying hello the wrong way or calling me he. Again, fall off the wagon there. But just getting them in and seeing how the manufacturing process works would probably be enough to excite like 30% of them to say, hey, this is interesting.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think, we really have done a poor job of pushing those types of professions. I do think they are noble and, it may not sound the sexiest to say, hey, I'm going to forego a degree with a esteemed institution to go to learn HVAC or plumbing or whatnot. But, think about the benefits if you go that route, the tremendous amount of savings that you're going to have versus, going to a 4+ year university, much less starting your career. You know, the amount of money that you can make in that period of time, the amount of money that you can be saving, all of that is fantastic. Or at the very least, you know, my daughter had her associate's degree before she graduated high school, and I love programs like that. They are out there, but there need to be more of them to where, hey, you can do dual credit. You know, as you're working on your high school diploma, you can also be working on an associate's degree. You know, incidentally, she wants to be a home builder. So, you know, it provided a little boost. But yeah, I think we need to focus on it. And, you know, I think you have companies again, I love picking on Clayton because they're one of my favorite companies, but they do programs where they train employees. They have, you know, quite a few different apprentice programs, all of that kind of stuff. I would love to see the manufactured and modular home industry do that. The factories have so much power, authority, and, you know, necessity within these organizations, have training programs within them, you know, and that actually brings up a really good question because I would wager a lot of them probably do. I've just done a poor job of asking the question you just asked, you know, but I think that's a really big opportunity. How do we have career fairs, not just halfway through your collegiate career, but how do we do it when you're in your high school career still? And look, I'm not bashing 4-year degrees. I think that or universities. I think that there's tremendous value there in becoming a well-rounded individual. But the problem you have a lot of times is people go to universities and maybe they wanted to be an architect and then they decided they wanted to be a builder or they wanted to be, you know, a business person or whatever. How much money does it take to get to that point? Whereas
Brian, I'm gonna push back. I'm gonna say most of them when they go don't know what they wanna do, and that's the
I
problem.
didn't.
You know, and then you end up in humanities like me, history and philosophy. Woohoo! Where did that get me? You know, then I ended up
I
being
was
a
a graphic
bartender.
design major and now I'm in the financial industry, so, you know.
Yeah, and so a perfect example, let's say not financial, but graphic design. AI is basically eating your lunch as we speak, right? And there are so many jobs that are gonna be obliterated because the technology is raging forward.
I know where you're
But when
going
it
with this.
comes to building, you know, AI can't put 2 pipes together, right? They're not gonna be able to put shingles on a roof. And you said it doesn't sound sexy, but I would like to do a parallel. Like if you take somebody that just started university,
Yeah.
somebody just started a trade, and now track them parallel 4 years. Like, it blows my mind that you finish university in debt with a degree, great, now you're running around trying to find a job. In the trades, you're getting paid as soon as you show up, like, you're getting paid to learn,
Literally
right?
as soon as you show up.
Then once you've done your apprenticeship, you're literally lethal because, you know, you do your time, maybe do 2, 3 years, get competent at what you do, but then you can start your own company. Then you've got people working for you. And those guys that have the degrees that don't know what they're doing will end up cleaning your pool or babysitting your kids. Right? That's and I know that's aggressive, but
No, but I think it's reasonable, Michael, because I think you're gonna find that home building is gonna be one of the last, you know, frontiers untouched. Not untouched, but, you know, look, even the financial side. I mean, AI is a huge factor for Cardinal. I mean, we have a proprietary LOS that, you know, does the job of, you know, most loans have 15, 16 people that touch them throughout the life of the loan, if not more. You know, our whole goal is to be able to throw a loan in at 10 o'clock on a Friday morning and have it clear to close by 11 o'clock Friday morning. You know, so yeah, it's going to be hugely impactful. I sat with a developer in Texas doing several thousand homes, and a big part of which is modular manufactured. This was fascinating. I know I'm going on a tangent now, but they've invested a ton of money in AI. What they did is they found this salesperson. I believe she was in Italy, if I'm not mistaken. She's supposed to be one of the, and I couldn't even tell you exactly what she was selling. But the fact of the matter is she is well known as one of the top salespeople in the world. So what they did is the AI company recorded her calls over a couple week period of time and learned everything, the inflections in her tones, the questions, the retorts, the rebuttals, all of that kind of stuff. Now what they're doing is taking it back and using it. They're not at the point where they're replacing their sales team yet, but it's able to handle inbound calls 20, 30, 40 at a time, what would take a regular person days to do just a few. So yeah, I mean, the whole point of that is AI is dramatically impacting jobs out there in every sector, probably quicker than any of us expected. But at what point, I mean, we're talking Arnold Schwarzenegger and Terminator level stuff if we're really expecting, robotic framing crews. And I know that there actually is some ability, and I think Boston Robotics even has I saw it years ago where there's a robot that could, do drywall and stuff like that. But, skilled trades, plumbers, electricians, HVAC, all that kind of stuff, it's going to be a long time, I think, before we really start to see that change dramatically. Now, because it's built in a factory, you got to even be kind of careful with that because how many people build a car now versus 20 years ago? So it's definitely going to be impacted. But yeah, I think it's going to be much slower. And I think those trades for the next, few decades are going to be very, very valuable. They get paid really well right now, Michael, and I don't know if they teach it in high school yet, but how much could, saving $20 a week or $100 a month, putting it away and 40 years later, what does that turn into? Invested properly, over a million or so dollars. Yeah. Starting to sock that money away when you're 18, 19. I mean, it took me I was a late bloomer. I took me a while to grow up. I could have done a lot with starting to work when I was 18, 19 instead of I loved college. I really loved it. I mean, I got good grades, make no mistake, but I also really enjoyed my time doing extracurricular activities. So, I digress, but I would love to see us push more on trades of all types. It's needed, they pay well, and it's not something you need to spend 4 years learning how to do.
Yeah, when you teasingly say it took you a while to grow up, I just purposely left this beard for you because I couldn't be bothered. So when it comes to maturity, man, I'm right on the same side.
Yeah,
And you
yeah.
mentioned something about Terminator, and this will make you laugh. Whenever I use I always say please and thank you because I figure maybe when the robots do come, they'll go, "Oh yeah, he's a nice guy. Maybe they'll kill me slowly." I don't know, but
I'm glad I'm not the only one. I do it for different reasons. Just I was raised that way, and so it just kind of accidentally comes out, or it's just ingrained in my brain. But I say thank you to Alexa or no thank you when she asks me if I need to buy more dog food. And if I have other people around, they kind of look at me like, "Did you really?" Yeah, I kind of did.
I thought that would have been a Canadian thing, but I think we're both stupid. That's what it is. So. Um,
Could be, could
Let
be.
let's go with, like, I wanna hit on the heart of the matter here.
Yeah,
Okay, you've mentioned guys like Cook Brothers.
yeah,
Alright, so they show up to a factory and they say, "Hot diggity, we're feeling lucky today. Roll the dice. We want 100 homes."
yeah,
Right? And I'm thinking from the perspective of that manufacturer, how can they scale
yeah,
to that point if they're churning out 1 home every 3 months or 4 months, whatever that
yeah,
timeline is.
yeah.
How many hot dogs can they actually roll down the conveyor belt?
Well, I love talking about this, and it's a more complex question than a quick answer. So we'll try to be as brief as possible. But it depends on how ambitious you are, how organized you are, who you have as partners, what the municipality's like. But I wager that you have really successful communities that are being built right now, with Clayton, with Champion, that, Cardinal Financial is working on with your team at Sound Capital. I think first you have to establish the how. You do have to get past the municipality because there is that NIMBYism, there is that perception issue. But that perception issue moves into the financial space. If you have a builder that wants to build 100 homes, you go to your local bank, they go, okay, great. Do you have, how are your financials? How are your experience? And you're great. It's not terribly difficult to do. But the moment you mention manufactured modular, the brakes start screeching, you know? Very, very few banks and mortgage companies really understand this product or have taken the time to understand it or don't turn their nose up at it. That's what I love about, how we've partnered with Sound Capital this year. We have taken the time to understand how to fund the purchase of the land, how to fund the all of the site work, cutting in the roads, the infrastructure, funding, lift stations and all of that kind of stuff, how to fund the vertical, which is different in this case because you're not funding over a period of 6 months. You got to figure out, look, it's different. You got to fund that whole home, which is substantially complete either when it leaves the factory or when it hits the lot. So you got to get past that. So you need to have the right people in place. And I think, again, I think we've done a really good job at putting together a comprehensive package along with Sound Capital. And then you have to be able to find and reach the buyer, finance the end buyer, because these are, again, done a little bit differently than normal. And then how you sell it. There's a different psychology behind selling these that you have to understand. You have to be able to compete with the site world. So those are all the main factors. And there's a lot more in depth in each one, but those are kind of what I would consider most of the kind of big things you need to know. Once you get that figured out, I think your velocity can be 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 a month. You could potentially do 8 to 20 a month or, 18 to 20 a month. I would say on average, most of the projects, we've got a 400 unit project outside of Houston that we're working on right now. The anticipated velocity is somewhere around 10 homes a month. So being able to deliver 8 to 10 homes a month, I think that is pretty reasonable. But there's other factors, how close you are to the factory, all of that kind of stuff. I don't think we're at the point where we're doing 40, 50, 60 a month. I mean, that would take pretty tremendous amount of support from multiple factories, multiple companies, that sort of thing. But again, you're talking about in a 30-day period of time, being able to build, let's say even 8 homes a month and then plus transport time. That's tremendous. So, you might have the ability over 6 months to do 30, 40, 50 homes potentially. That's pretty spectacular, which if you have site built, the amount of crews, the amount of coordination, the amount of supplies and all that, it's a logistical nightmare as opposed to got it all done in one place, one
Yeah,
factory.
it's crazy what they can churn out, but the stumbling block or the bottleneck is still like what you guys do at Cardinal is phenomenal. You work with the consumers and you understand how to put that mortgage together because again, we're dealing with a weird animal here because it's not
Different.
publicly accepted yet by all the financial institutions. So
Correct.
you've carved yourself out a really good niche and you know how to navigate those waters. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but from the builder's perspective, when they go in to get a modular home, they're putting down like a down payment of 25%. Things starts chugging down the line. There's another 25% when it gets to a certain point of completion. And I think what is it? Another 25% when it actually leaves the factory and it's
It
on the
depends.
flatbed.
It
Yeah.
depends. I think, what you're talking about, some modular builders do, and that's more of a stage draw where most modular and manufactured is actually substantially more. You might put a 10%, typically you have like a 10-80-10 draw. You have a 10% up front for the deposits. You have 80% either once it be somewhere between when it leaves the factory or when it's installed, depending on who's funding it. And then the remaining 10% once all the site work is done. You have flooring lines that can fund this stuff, but it's very different. And again, that's why it's been so enjoyable to work with sound is you guys have done a really good job of understanding that, hey, it's different. It's not the same as site built. Most local banks don't get it because, well, wait a minute. We're used to funding it when the foundation's poured or the framing's been done or, whatever. Now they're saying, wait, you want me to pay for the entire home or once it leaves the factory or once it's installed? That doesn't make any sense. We don't do it that way. That's the way it's done in this industry. But if you really think about it, it's no different because a local bank is going to want to pay for materials once they've actually been installed. Nobody wants to pay for a stack of lumber sitting on a job site that can get wet, or God forbid stolen as what happened frequently during COVID. We're only going to pay when that house is, on the stages of completion. Well, it's really no different. The house itself has been completed in a factory. So by the time it gets to the site, it's done. So it's just different way that it's done that most funding companies, most local banks don't understand that portion of it. Look, I think we've done a masterful job of understanding how to do the takeout, and finance on the buyer side. But a critical, absolutely critical piece, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. And I don't want to overplug sound, but I mean, I think you kind of have to, because is how to fund that space. How do I go from let's say I've got my dirt ready to go, and I want to do 10 houses. I want to do 10 specs, a couple models, whatever. How do I do that when it's dramatically different in process than stick built? Very, very, very few companies understand it, and even fewer will actually do it. And I think we've sort of figured out, in unison how that secret sauce works, which is why the phone's been ringing off the hook for the last, I would say 90, 120 days, because that I think was a huge barrier. I mean, look, we know the municipalities are going to be a problem. We know that entitlements, permits, all that kind of stuff, that can be a challenge. But I think the single biggest thing every builder wants and needs to know, I have my land. How do I fund the site work? How do I fund the purchase of these homes? How do I fund the installation of these homes? And how do we make sure our clients at the end of it? That stuff is absolutely critical. It's really not that intimidating once you learn it, but nobody wants to learn it or they're scared of it.
Yeah, when you mention the obstacles, and when I think of zoning and all the different regulations, it's almost like some states intentionally get in the way. So one side of the equation, they want to stand on the podium. Yeah, we need more homes. Oh, yeah, we're all about building homes. And then, well, yeah, but here's a really neat one that we can throw at them. It can only be so high, so wide, and it has to be blue. Like they can make up all the regulations they want. They're inhibiting the actual growth and solving that dilemma that we're in right now, that we need homes. So let me throw this idea, and maybe I'm just too naive because again, I'm focusing on that funding side
Yeah,
from the builder's perspective. And when I look at the bank, let's just say lender, okay, let's just, because it could be private
sure.
money, whatever. Let's just say lender. The first thing they look at is, all right, I'll give you money, but how much is my ass exposed here? What's the likelihood of me getting that money back with interest?
Mhm.
And that is the foundation of every loan that's ever been done. What's my exposure? Will I get my money back?
Worst.
How much am I going to make? Got that. They look at modular and they go, "What exactly are we funding here? We're funding a conveyor belt, in essence, until that sucker is actually transported to the site, bolted down onto a foundation, and plugged in." And
Yeah.
obviously, I'm simplifying this, but what if here's my evil thought, and maybe it's too simple because that's the way I think things. What if you got an insurance company involved? And insurance will insure anything, like Pavarotti had his throat insured. I think
Football players
Elvis
have their body
ev
parts insured, yeah.
so couldn't they come up with a rider, if you will, right? So I don't know if it's between the builder and the company, let's say between the 2 somehow, but the insurance company places a rider on that construction that's being done in the factory, all right? This is all in the factory right now. And it would be based on the integrity of the company, liquidity, what's their reputation like. So you could come up with a whole hierarchy of things that that manufacturer would have to be able to check off all those boxes. The builder, we're doing that with them right now. Like it's Sound Capital, it's fairly simple because we're using private money. But you have to have a 680 credit scored minimum. You've never been in prison or convicted, and you've had 10 homes on title. Once you've done that, you're golden.
Yeah.
Why can't we do the same thing, but pull insurance in, and they do, like I said, some kind of simple rider so the risk is mitigated based on, like I said, the performance of the company, the performance of the builder. And man, we could start churning these things out like popcorn. And that rider, if you want to call it that, whatever it is terminated the moment that house touches down on the build site.
Well, and I think there already is, and I wouldn't call myself an expert on, factories and whatnot. I've learned a lot over the last several years, but, you have transport insurance, so the house is insured there. And I think Sound does a good job of underwriting, just like you do with a site built builder. Huge amount of it is making sure you don't have any judgments, liens, all that kind of stuff against you. Do you have experience doing what you're asking us to finance to do? There is an additional step. Yeah, you want to make sure that the factory is solvent. Easy to do when you're talking about builders like Impressive Modular, Clayton, Champion, Cavco, that sort of thing. But yeah, you want to dig a little bit deeper when you're talking about some of these smaller factories. I think you guys are doing a factory in Colorado, really, really good group. But yeah, you want to make sure, do they have the history? Do they have the experience? Factories fortunately are insured. Most of them have property and in equipment insurance. And then 100%, every modular or manufactured home has a separate transport insurance policy. So the moment it leaves the factory until the moment it's installed, that house is insured. So it does exist. It's just a matter of understanding it different than where the site built world is. And I'll go back again and I'll plug you guys because I think it's important. You guys have taken the time to realize that it is different. It's still there. There are those protections and checks and balances in place. They just look a little bit different than what they do with your typical general liability policy and all of that when on a home builder. And it's actually, in a lot of ways, I think it's better because that whole house, 100% of it is insured from the moment it leaves, as opposed to what happens if you drop lumber off and it gets stolen, that sort of thing. So I think it's there, Michael. It just looks differently, and you got to take the time to realize, hey, how do we get comfortable with it when it looks a little bit differently? There's a lot of other factors I think that make this more attractive from a risk standpoint. When you're talking about builds, you look at, especially after Silicon Valley Bank collapsed, huge amount of these depository institutions didn't want to do construction loans anymore because these are assets that are sitting out there for not just 12 months. A lot of times they're sitting out there for 16, 18 months when you're talking about larger bills. A lot can happen geopolitically in 16 to 18 months. A lot less can happen in 30 to 60 days. So when you're talking about cycle times that are dramatically quicker, from a risk standpoint, it's substantially less there. And then obviously from a qualifying standpoint, companies like Sound, they're not going to want to put out product unless they have a really good confidence level that, mortgage company like Cardinal Financial is going to be able to take that loan out. Well, we're doing pre-approvals, but we only need to do them for 90 days as opposed to 12 months. So again, there's just a lot of other factors in there that I think can be substantially less with man home and modular versus site built.
No, I'm not trying to imply that modular is the answer to the
Yes.
building crisis, but man, if you could open the tap, if you will, and the funding started flowing, it would become a serious contender in helping to eliminate and getting homes done quicker. That's and so again, I'm just thinking it's that piece in the middle as it's being manufactured, because the average builder doesn't have the funding to come up and pay, the 10%, 25%, whatever that equation is, especially if they want to do it at scale. Like, your
Mhm.
bigger guys like Cook Brothers, yeah, they could write a check tomorrow. I mean, they probably have that money, the cushions of their truck, if they dig deep
Not
enough.
necessarily, Michael, not necessarily. I think even your larger builders, I mean, you're talking Lennars and KBs and all that kind of stuff, that's fine. But I think there's a huge gap between the builders that are doing maybe 5, 10 homes a year and the builders that are doing over 500 a year. Those ones that want to do 50, 100, 200, whatever, that is where it is needed absolutely the most. And that is where so few people, so few lending institutions actually play within, which is why, Sound and Cardinal has done so well recently,
Yeah.
because that's a space that we realize the opportunities there. We realize the needs there. And look, I'd love to see more of it. As much as I want to do every single community development across the country, look, there's plenty of business to go around. We need more companies to get into this space. It's good for the industry.
Brian, we've covered a lot of territory here. Is there anything I'm missing or anything that you want to touch on?
I think the most important thing is, we do need to get the message out that, look, if you are a builder and a developer, whether it's a traditional land home community or you want to do land lease, get the conversation started. It's not as It's not as difficult as you may think. We've done it between our two organizations over and over again. I think we're getting pretty darn good at it, but you got to start somewhere. That's probably one of the biggest messages. Kind of like, okay, so we tell clients, we tell buyers, you want to build a house. Don't wait until you've got your contract plan, specs, and budget together before you engage one of my loan officers. That could be too late. What if you have credit challenges? What if you had to put down more money than you expected? Whatever. Don't wait. It should be one of the first thing that you do. Same exact thing. Talk to the financial side, talk to the lenders, talk to Cardinal, talk to Sound. And at the very, very beginning, because we can walk you through what is your LTV, what is your LTC, what is your funding levels for purchasing the land, moving the dirt, how do we provide guidance lines and flooring lines, and how do we finance it on the back end? Again, whether it's and the cool thing is there's a huge amount of flexibility in all that. We're doing a lot of projects right now where the manufactured and modular space has been heavily steeped in land lease communities over the last, 30, 40, 50 some odd years. The thought process is always, well, we got to go chattel. Well, chattel is a personal property loan, higher interest rates, higher points and fees and all that. No, you don't have to. Fannie Mae has done a tremendous job at working with us and saying, hey, we want to make funding the end buyer on a manufactured or modular home, even if it is in a land lease community, substantially easier. As easy as if you're walking into a KB or an R or whatever. And that becomes really powerful for organizations like Sound, because again, you're not going to expose yourself and fund a project that you can't get an end buyer for. So engage with us early. We can walk you through the pitfalls and we can show you that, look, it's not as difficult as you think. It really isn't.
Yeah. I guess in closing, number one, they are not trailer park boys' homes.
No, please don't call it
Yeah.
that. They are homes. First and foremost,
Yeah.
they're homes. They are well built. They are well finished out. I love to reference ultimately what, again, you need to talk to Andy Bryan at Clayton. Anytime somebody says trailer, oval, he goes, no, they're homes. That's
I
what
think
they are.
you said it right at the beginning. What a savvy consumer, that being somebody that wants to live in one or a builder that wants to build them, need to get your ass on the bus and go to the
Yeah,
manufacturer, see how they're put
please do.
together. But then more importantly, go to, like Louisville, like go to Harvest Meadow and see what it's like in context of being in a community. Right. And I think once you can tactile touch the thing, see the thing and be inside it, I think that's gonna flip it on its head that, yeah, this is definitely a viable option.
I think that's a really, really good statement. I think you have to do it. I mean, if, Secretary Turner can do it and spend time out of his busy schedule to go look at these projects and, they do an event on the National Mall every year where they have these houses out there. Go see it, or come to us and we can help you. We can share some of the projects that we're working on and, have you go out and see it. There's a lot of really good developers that are utilizing this project. Go see it, go visit a factory, go visit, and again, I mean, some of our favorite people, Champion, Clayton, Impressa, Villa Homes, there's a lot of really good people out there. Find one nearby, go take a look at it, walk through the homes, and see how that process is done. It's fascinating and well worth the 45 minutes to an hour or so that a tour takes.
I think I'll sum it up by saying Coca-Cola and Nike have made billions, and their trademark is Coca-Cola says, "It's the real thing,"
It's a real thing. There
and
you go.
Nike is, "Just do
Just
it,"
do it.
right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
that's the message to the builders and to the
yeah,
public. It's the
yeah.
real thing, just do it.
Just do it.
Brian Hurd,
Yeah,
my friend, of that wonderful financial institute
pleasure.
that you belong to, what's a quick plug? Where can they find out more about you?
I would say if you're posting this on LinkedIn, that's the easiest way to reach out. I love what I do. I love talking about it. It's never an issue. Otherwise, go to cardinalfinancial.com. We've got a really good section on attainable housing, modular and manufactured. Always willing to share thoughts, ideas, and as you can tell, I'm very passionate about it.
All right, my friend. Thanks again for your time. I guess I'll see you in February at the Build Show.
Absolutely. Really excited to be there.
Thanks for listening to Builder Straight Talk. Make sure to like, comment, and share this episode on your favorite social media platform. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, available wherever you get your podcast streaming fix. Until next time, keep building smarter. This episode is made possible by our parent company, Sound Capital, funding built for builders.